So imagine this scenario for a second. You know that familiar leg pain starts when you're walking.
A common complaint.
Yeah, and it's just an annoyance at first, but then, well, it starts to deepen. Maybe it creeps into your rest time, makes it hard to relax.
Or sometimes it's
Yeah.
even more serious, like a wound that just won't heal.
Yeah,
Maybe worse.
exactly. And these things, they aren't just small problems, are they? They really limit your daily life. They become real roadblocks.
That kind of pain, especially if it gets worse or leads to those non-healing wounds, well, it usually points to a serious underlying issue.
Which is?
Severe narrowing of the arteries in your legs.
Mm.
And when the simpler treatments don't cut it, doctors often consider a more advanced solution.
And that's exactly what we're diving deep into today, femoro-popliteal bypass surgery. Our mission here is pretty straightforward. To quickly get you up to speed, give you the crucial insights into this, well, it's a complex procedure.
Yeah, it is.
We want to unpack why it's done, what you should expect, and maybe the most important part, how much your choices actually matter for success.
Definitely. We'll map it out. Starting with, what's actually causing the problem. Then we'll walk through the surgery itself, what recovery looks like.
And crucially, the preparation and the risks. You need to know that stuff, right?
Absolutely vital for making an informed decision.
Okay, so let's start there. The underlying problem. Atherosclerosis. It sounds complicated. What's actually going on inside the arteries?
Well, think of your arteries like pipes carrying blood. Atherosclerosis is when this fatty gunk, it's called, atheroma, starts building up inside those pipes.
Like plaque.
Exactly like plaque. It coats the artery walls, makes them narrow, stiff, harder, and the result, less blood can get through. Simple as that, really.
And when this happens specifically in the leg arteries, what does that feel like? What are the signs?
So in the legs, the classic first sign is pain when you walk, usually in the calf or thigh. We call it claudication. It tends to ease off when you rest.
Okay.
But if that narrowing gets worse, the pain can become more constant. It might even hurt when you're just resting, maybe lying in bed.
Ouch.
Yeah. And in really severe cases where the blood supply is critically low, you might see things like ulcers on your feet or toes that just won't heal, or even gangrene.
Wow. That progression from walking pain to rest pain to actual tissue damage, it really shows how serious this can get.
It does.
So what causes this atherosclerosis in the first place? What are the main culprits?
Well, the big ones are smoking. That's a major factor. High blood pressure, having a family history of it, getting older, diabetes, the big one too, and high cholesterol levels.
And these aren't just about legs, are they? These sound like the same risk factors for heart attacks and strokes.
They were exactly the same. It's a systemic problem, really. Affects arteries everywhere, not just the legs.
Now, for this specific surgery, the fempop bypass, is there one particular artery in the leg that tends to get blocked like this?
Yes, very often it's a superficial femoral artery. That's a major artery running down your thigh. It's a common spot for severe blockages that need this kind of intervention.
So why jump to surgery? You mentioned simpler treatments earlier. Are those usually tried first?
Oh, absolutely. Simpler techniques like angioplasty, where they use a tiny balloon to widen the artery, are often the first port of call if the blockage is suitable for it.
Right.
But, when the narrowing is really severe or maybe very long, or if angioplasty hasn't worked or isn't an option, that's when bypass surgery becomes the recommendation. It's about restoring that essential blood flow when other methods can't.
Okay, so it's for the more serious blockages where less invasive stuff isn't going to cut it, which brings us squarely to the procedure. Femoro-popliteal bypass. What's the fundamental goal here?
The purpose is crystal clear. Bypass the block section. Create a new route, a detour, for the blood to flow around that blockage in the leg artery.
A detour for the blood. I like that. So how is this detour actually built? What do they use?
They use a graft. This can either be one of your own veins, often taken from your leg, sometimes your arm, or it can be a synthetic graft, basically a man-made tube.
Okay.
And this graft, this new pipe, is stitched onto the artery above the blockage, usually the common femoral artery in the groin, and then connected to the artery below the blockage. So blood flows through the graft, completely bypassing the block part.
Makes sense. And once that new route is working, what are the real-world benefits? What changes for the patient?
Well, the biggest one is usually less pain. Walking becomes easier, your mobility improves, you get better blood supply down to the leg and foot.
Which helps with those other issues, right? Like the ulcers.
Exactly. It helps prevent new ulcers or gangrene from developing. And if you already have ulcers, that improved blood flow is crucial for helping them heal.
Sounds like it could be life-changing, potentially limb-saving even.
It certainly can be.
But even if the surgeon strongly recommends it, the final say, that still lies with the patient.
100%. The surgeon explains the situation, the recommendation, the risks, the benefits, but the ultimate decision to go ahead, that's yours. Which is why understanding all this is so important. Informed consent.
Right. That empowerment is key. Okay, let's talk about the choices and the prep work. We touched on angioplasty as an alternative. Is that always tried first?
It's very common, yes. Usually the first option if it's appropriate for that specific blockage. Sometimes, though, the blockage might be too long or too calcified or in a tricky spot.
So the surgeon would explain why bypass is better in that case.
Precisely. They'll lay out why bypass is considered the best route for you.
And what if someone hears all this and decides, no, I don't want the surgery? What happens then? What are the potential downsides of not having it?
Well, the medical team will still manage the risk factors, medication for blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, blood thinners. But, and this is non-negotiable really, you absolutely have to stop smoking.
Why is that so critical if you're not having the surgery?
Because smoking will almost certainly make the underlying artery disease worse. Without the bypass, the blood supply might just keep getting worse. That means more pain, more often. Ulcers that don't heal or get worse. Gangrene. And ultimately, the risk of amputation becomes much higher.
That really puts the decision into perspective. Okay, so let's say someone decides yes to surgery. What's their role? How can you, the patient, actively help make it a success?
Your role is huge, absolutely massive. First, as we just said, smoking. If you smoke, stopping is the single most important thing you can do.
Why? Does it affect the surgery itself?
Dramatically. Smoking is a major reason the disease develops in the first place, and it massively increases the risk of the bypass graft failing later on. Stopping, even just a few weeks before surgery, can genuinely reduce complications and boost your long-term health. It's incredible how quickly it helps.
Wow, okay, stop smoking. What else?
Maintaining a healthy weight helps. Being overweight adds strain and increases complication risks. Regular exercise is also good with your doctors. Okay, of course, it gets your body ready and helps recovery. Simple things too, like drinking enough fluids to stay hydrated.
And what about medications? People might be on blood thinners or other drugs.
Crucial point. You must follow the team's advice to the letter about stopping certain meds, especially anticoagulants or antiplatelets, and tell them everything you're taking.
Everything. Even like herbal stuff?
Everything. Herbal remedies, supplements, over-the-counter things. They can all potentially interact with anesthesia or affect bleeding. Don't hold anything back.
Good advice. And what about reducing infection risk at the surgical site? Any practical tips there?
Yes. Don't shade or wax the area where the cuts will be for about a week beforehand. Have a good bath or shower the day before or the morning of surgery. Keeping warm just before the operation helps too. And if you have diabetes, keeping your blood sugar levels well controlled is really important for healing and fighting infection.
Okay, so lots of prep the patient can actively do. All right, let's move to the operation day itself. What happens from arrival to the actual procedure?
First off, lots of checks. The team confirms it's the right patient, right operation, right leg. You'll be asked to confirm too.
Safety first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then you'll meet the anesthetist again. They'll discuss the plan. Might be general anesthesia, could be spinal, sometimes combined. They might also use local anesthetic injections near the wound sites to help with pain afterwards. And you'll likely get antibiotics during the operation to minimize infection risk.
How long does the surgery itself usually take?
It varies quite a bit, depending on the specifics, usually somewhere between, say, 1 and 5 hours.
And where exactly are the cuts made? You mentioned the groin.
Yes, typically one incision in the groin over the common femoral artery, and another one lower down, often on the inner side of the leg, near the knee or below it, to get to the popliteal artery.
And then the graft connects those 2 points.
That's it. The graft, again, either your vein or the synthetic one, gets carefully stitched to the artery in the groin, tunneled under the skin, and then stitched to the artery lower down, bypassing the blockage.
You mentioned the choice of graft. How is that decided?
The surgeon discusses this with you beforehand. Your own vein, if suitable, often lasts longer. But sometimes it's not good enough quality, or maybe it's needed elsewhere. Artificial grafts work well too, but might have a slightly higher risk of blocking over time. They weigh the pros and cons for your specific case.
Okay. And after the graft is in place?
They check the blood flow is good, then close the skin incisions with stitches or surgical clips.
What about tubes and lines? Will people wake up with those?
Usually, yes. You'll likely have an IV drip in your arm for fluids, maybe a central line, a special IV in a neck vein for close monitoring of blood pressure and fluids, and often a urinary catheter in your bladder for the first day or so.
Right. Now, the tough part. Complications and risks. Every surgery has them. Who's generally at higher risk with this procedure?
Well, like most major surgeries, the risks can be higher if you're older, if you're overweight, if you smoke, or if you have other significant health issues like diabetes, heart problems, or lung disease. Your team will talk through your specific risk profile.
Okay. Let's break down the potential complications. Maybe start with the general ones that could happen with almost any big operation.
Sure, so bleeding is one. Some bruising is normal, but significant bleeding might need a blood transfusion or rarely another operation. Wound infection is another risk, often treatable with antibiotics, but sometimes needs more intervention. The specific risk of the graft getting infected is about 1 in 10, which is serious.
Okay. Bleeding, infection, what else?
Allergic reactions can happen to anesthetics, materials, medications. Acute kidney injury is possible if blood pressure drops significantly during the op, usually temporary, but sometimes can lead to longer-term kidney issues. Blood clots are a risk too, DVT, deep vein thrombosis in the leg.
Right, the leg clot. Painful.
Yes, can cause pain, swelling, redness. That's why getting mobile early, using special stockings, and sometimes blood-thinning injections are so important for prevention.
And that clot can travel, can't it?
It can. If a piece breaks off and goes to the lungs, that's a pulmonary embolus. That's serious. Causes shortness of breath, chest pain, coughing up blood potentially.
Yeah.
Chest infections can also happen after anesthesia.
Okay, those are the general surgical risks. What about complications specific to this femoro-popliteal bypass?
The main one is the bypass graft itself, blocking up graft failure. This can happen early on or even years down the line. And the risk, interestingly, depends on the graft type.
You mentioned this earlier, the difference between vein and artificial.
Exactly. With a natural vein graft, the risk of it blocking within 5 years is roughly 1 in 5. With an artificial graft, it's significantly higher, maybe closer to 1 in 2, so 50-50 within 5 years.
Wow, that's a huge difference. Why is the vein graft so much better generally?
It's living tissue. It integrates better. It's more resistant to clotting and narrowing where it joins your artery. The artificial ones are amazing technology, but they're still foreign material.
Makes sense. What other specific risks?
Infection right at the graft joint. This is rare, maybe 1 in 100, but serious. It can cause a false aneurysm, a dangerous bulge. Might need another operation, strong antibiotics. Very rarely, if infection can't be cleared, it could lead to amputation. That pre-op bathing we mentioned helps reduce this.
Okay, what else?
Leg swelling is very common afterwards, usually settles over time. There's a small risk, maybe 1 in 20. The debris could travel down and block smaller arteries in the foot during or after the op.
And amputation, you mentioned it regarding infection.
Yes, it's the most serious outcome. If the bypass fails completely and circulation can't be restored, or there's severe uncontrollable infection, the risk is about 1 in 100 for a planned operation, but higher, maybe 1 in 30 if it's an emergency situation.
That's sobering. Any others?
Fluid collecting under the wound, a seroma or hematoma. Happens maybe 1 in 10 times, can cause leaking, usually settles on its own. Nerve injury is possible too. Cutting tiny skin nerves can cause numbness around the scars, sometimes permanent, though often improves. And finally, the risk of dying within 30 days is about 1 in 30, mostly linked to underlying serious health problems being stressed by major surgery.
That's a comprehensive list, and it's vital information. Okay, surgery's done, the risks are understood. What about recovery? What happens right after?
So immediately after, you go to the recovery room, then usually to the surgical ward. Sometimes, if you need closer watching, maybe to an intensive care or high dependency unit for the first day or so.
Can you eat and drink?
Usually you can drink once you're awake enough after the anesthetic. You'll still have the IV drip for fluids initially. That central line, if you have one, helps the team manage your fluids carefully based on blood pressure.
In the drains and catheter.
Those usually come out after maybe 2 to 5 days once you're moving around more and drinking well.
How long are people typically in hospital?
Usually around 4 to 7 days, but it really depends on your recovery and any other health issues. Could be longer. And remember, if you're worried about anything at all, in hospital or after you go home, just contact the healthcare team. Don't hesitate.
Good advice. Okay, so you're home. What's key for getting back to normal?
Number 1, follow the instructions for preventing blood clots. Take the medication exactly as prescribed. Wear the special stockings if advised. Expect to feel tired for a while, maybe up to 6 weeks or so. That's normal healing.
And smoking. Still relevant after surgery.
Absolutely critical. Smoking seriously jeopardizes how long the graft will last. Stopping is key to the operation's long-term success. Regular gentle exercise, as advised by your team or GP, really helps recovery too. Build it up gradually.
What about driving? When can you get back behind the wheel?
Only when you feel fully confident you can control the car safely, including perform an emergency stop without pain or hesitation. Always check with your insurance company and your healthcare team first. There's no set time. It depends on your recovery.
Okay. Looking further ahead, what's the long-term outlook?
For most people, it's good. They get back to normal activities, pain is much reduced or gone, quality of life improves significantly.
Do you need long-term medication?
Yes, usually a long-term blood thinner like low-dose aspirin or clopidogrel is recommended. This helps keep the graft open and reduces the risk of future blockages elsewhere.
And you mentioned something really important earlier about future surgery.
Yes, this is vital. If you ever need other surgery on that same leg in the future, especially something like a knee replacement where they might use a tourniquet, you must tell the surgical team you have a bypass graft in that leg. It affects how they manage the operation. Crucial information.
Definitely worth repeating. Okay, finally, let's just touch on the immediate aftermath, pain and scarring.
Yes, pain after this operation can be significant, but it will be managed with strong painkillers, sometimes an epidural or IV drip initially. It's really important to take the painkillers as offered, because being comfortable allows you to move, cough, and breathe deeply, which helps prevent complications like clots and chest infections.
And the scars.
You will have noticeable scars, usually in the groin and along the leg where the incisions were made. They fade over time, but they'll always be there. A reminder of the journey, perhaps.
So let's wrap this deep dive up. The key message seems to be that femoro-popliteal bypass is a major operation, usually for serious leg artery blockages caused by atherosclerosis when other treatments aren't enough.
That's right. It's very effective at restoring blood flow and relieving symptoms, but like any big surgery, it carries definite risks and requires significant preparation and recovery.
And being fully informed about all of it, the condition, the procedure, the benefits, the prep, the potential complications, that seems absolutely essential for anyone considering it.
It empowers you. It allows you to make a truly informed decision alongside your medical team and to be an active participant in your own recovery and long-term health. Knowledge really is power here.
Absolutely. This whole discussion really underscores how much our lifestyle choices, like smoking, intersect with these really advanced medical procedures and how vital being informed is. So maybe the provocative thought to leave you with today is this. Beyond just reacting to health problems, what's one small step you could take starting today to become a more informed, more active partner in managing your own health and well-being for the future?